Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the south-afrifur podcast. You're listening to myself, Ivik Wolf, and my co-host is Scratch, as usual.
Yo.
And our guest for this evening is Mr. Hugo Jackson, also known as Pangolin-fox, also known as Arc, also known as the writer for the, what is it, a tetralogy?
It's a tetralogy, yes.
Okay, for, what was it, The Resonance, yes?
Yes, that's right.
All right. Okay. So, geez, you've actually done quite a little bit of things, or quite a lot of things here, that being internet voice acting in series. You're addicted to cosplaying, which is probably a good thing and probably one of the better addictions that we get,
Mhm.
as well as performing on stage in movies and TV, primarily roles involved with stage combat and historical reenactment. So that
Ooh.
explains the other sort of like live RP thing that you probably do, yeah?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, that's really, really interesting. So maybe just tell us a little bit more about your book.
Um, well, the Resonance Tetralogy is a series of. It was going to be 4 books. It's now 4 books and an ebook. Um, the first one is called Legacy, and it is about this fox empress called Faria, who has control over crystals that can manipulate various elements like wind, fire, water, stuff like that. At the beginning of the first book, her father goes missing. There's some political rumblings going on, and her city is laid siege to by dragons. And she has to learn to control her powers, stop a war, find her father, and discover the secrets of this lost city before the world kind of crumbles beneath all this conflict.
Yeesh.
All right,
Tall order.
sounds pretty intricate.
Yeah.
And like, how did you come up with that? We'll get to you as a person just now. We'll get the book out of the way now, so maybe we can talk about you just now a little bit more. So maybe just how did you come up with that concept
The weird
exactly?
thing is it kind of started off like the best way to describe it would be Power Rangers meets Trigun. If you're familiar with that anime series, it was a. I was really, really fond of this old animated series called Visionaries when I was growing up, and it was these knights in a world of magic that could transform into their animal totems that were bestowed upon them by this wizard with an enormous beard. So the idea of being able to transform into animals and then Power Rangers came along and stuff like that was always something that appealed to me greatly. And in my head, when I was developing this story, the characters would transform into like a silver fox mech, a green wolf mech, and eventually I knew these characters so much by what they would transform into that I just thought, you know what, it's just easier to make them animals from the beginning. And I'd always been kind of always liked furry characters from things like Robin Hood and stuff like that. But that's when I really started developing it as a furry story in earnest. Taking a lot of inspiration from various soundtracks and stuff like that. It kind of developed into more of a medieval, slightly steampunky fantasy. But that's where it took its origins from a very kind of sort of post-apocalyptic desert sci-fi world. It's interesting how it changes to something very medieval.
It sounds like it's
Okay.
borrowed from a million different worlds though. Like I love how people always like drag inspiration from so many different things to craft their own worlds.
Yeah, I mean, it's, um, the story kind of it came about because I wasn't watching enough stuff that kept me fulfilled creatively. I would like an element of one thing, an element of another, but I didn't feel that was anything like specifically for me,
Hmm.
what I wanted to see. I get so annoyed when this character did this, or this story went that way, or the series just kind of went downhill generally with how they were dragged out. So I thought, you know what? This is the story that I have in my head. I'm going to put it down so that I can enjoy it at least. And then it got to the point where I wanted to release it and hope that other people can enjoy it too.
Nice.
Okay.
That's awesome.
W- when it sort of comes from this, now we spoke to Sean last week, and he's obviously a person who publishes books and things like that. So maybe walk us through how you actually managed to find a publisher that was interested in your work.
Sure. I started off actually self-publishing it through Amazon Kindle and it was released in, it was November 2010, I think, that I eventually put it out there. Read all the how-tos and the tutorials on how to format it properly so it didn't mess up on the Kindle screen and stuff like that. And with Kindle, at least you could at the time, it's probably changed a little bit since then, but you could set your book to be free for a certain number of days. And I thought, okay, the time I'm going to give myself the best exposure is over Christmas, because everyone's going to be given new Kindles and they're not necessarily going to have gift cards to go with it. So they're going to be looking for all the free books. So I thought, okay, over Christmas, New Year, I'll make my book free for that period. And then everyone who gets new Kindles will, hopefully download it and enjoy it. And as luck would have it, the person who would then become my publisher got a Kindle for Christmas and downloaded it free, and then they emailed me a short while later and said, your story's really good, this is the kind of thing that we would really like submitted to our independent publisher. And I wasn't sure at first, because my dad worked a lot with a lot of science fiction writers and publishers in England. He used to write a lot of fanzines and things, and I heard some horror stories about how editors would want to get rid of these characters, get rid of this element, and I was very afraid at that point that any mainstream publisher would say, well, why are they animals? What's the point? And I didn't want to have to change that element, so I was very sketchy of people coming in and saying, I want to change this. But, we emailed back and forth. She was very understanding about how special the book was to me, and eventually I said, okay, well, let's meet up and we'll discuss it. The fact that she liked the book in the first place was a good sign for me, because she'd obviously read it by that point and understood the the aesthetics and the fantasy world and stuff like that, and go, okay, animals that's a cool theme, I can get behind that. And thankfully she did, and still has been. So that's and it kind of, and then it went into traditional publishing from there.
Okay. And when it comes to sort of the the other roles that you have aside from being a writer and things like that, what else do you actually do aside from TV and movies and stage combat?
Well, I haven't done that much of that recently. I really wanted to, but since moving to America, I haven't had the same kind of group that would get me involved in that. But I have been doing the internet voice acting and stuff like that. Is really cool. Done some narration for some horror podcasts, some science fiction podcasts, and at the moment I'm playing a small cat in a Minecraft machinima called Hunters of Flahara. Yeah, it's actually a very, very cool series. I'm really enjoying it. The cat's name is Benjamin, and he's a little Scottish calico cat. And when I auditioned, they said that, oh, can you try rolling your R's? And I thought, as I was doing it, as I was trying the lines, the more I did it, the more I thought, he just sounds like it'd be more comfortable if I was just properly Scottish, And so I did that, and they really liked it. And now I am now a small Scottish square cat.
Oh my goodness. Okay, and I mean, like, obviously Scratch and I are big Minecraft fans in some senses, so we can definitely get behind something like that.
Excellent.
But what kind of horror things have you done now? Like, I tend to listen to creepypastas to fall asleep, which is
your weird thing.
What?
Which is your weird thing.
Yeah, I know, right? There's nothing better than being alone and putting on like a creepypasta with like ghosts and shit in it. I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with me?
Cannot,
there are
please.
Lots of things wrong with me, but
cannot,
what?
please cannot. No, thank you.
Okay. So, like, which channels have you worked with on that?
I've done a couple of independent horror projects. I can't remember which ones I've done. I narrated a sort of pseudo-vampire short story that someone released online, and the biggest one I did was for the Pseudopod horror podcast, which comes out every 2 weeks, I think it is, with a short story. That was a lot of fun. Again, funnily enough, they wanted a Scottish accent for it. Again, it was this really creepy horror about this guy who moves to Glasgow, I think it is, to go to college, and ends up in his old family apartment and remembers there's something about the walls and the smell of roses. And he's, as it goes on, he's kind of grooming people to kill them and feed them to this thing in the walls. It was very, very, very cool.
That's actually super interesting. I should have a look at that. Actually. Wow. Okay. So, sheesh. When it comes to your, I guess your writing style and what exactly sort of like, I know that while I was doing sort of an initial search, I guess on you, because it was kind of weird that we sort of bumped heads when we did, because I was on Twitter and you, I think, mentioned or something like that. Um, I don't know where you were mentioned it, but I remember that I messaged you specifically because I liked your icon. That was the initial thing, and then I was sitting there going like, "Oh goodness, he's a writer too. This works." And so I know that that was sort of my initial draw to it, and but when it comes to sort of that kind of perspective of things, like I know that it may not have like been the initial way that you would have liked people to have sort of like spoken to you about things, but I mean, since we're on the topic, what exactly draws you to this idea of like a pangolin and a fox together? How do you many people have these explanations for them, so how do you explain yours away?
It took me a long time to kind of develop my persona. I I I love foxes. I absolutely adore foxes. You know, Robin Hood always my favorite character. Obviously, the main characters in my book are the main family in my book are foxes. But I came across pangolins. When was it? It was some years ago because it was before I started writing this book. Because there is a pangolin character who features very heavily in the second book and a little bit in the first. And I just thought there are these amazing, beautiful creatures. And when I was coming, I for a long time I would said I'm not a furry. I just write stories. I'm not a furry because I
Uh-huh.
wasn't sure how I could be like. I didn't think I'd be popular. I didn't think I would, fit in with all the aesthetics and stuff like that. I was just very shy and very nervous. So when I finally said to myself, all right, I need to embrace this because it's just hurting me by not saying I am a furry. I found
Mm-hmm.
this amazing kind of creative freedom, and I'm so glad that I eventually did that. And when I came across the idea that people could be hybrids, I thought that's really interesting. I don't know why I didn't think of that before. The idea that I could see myself kind of spiritually, physically in this furry world as two things that I feel very connected to. The fox for the aesthetics of things that I always grew up in, and the pangolin as a more kind of personal perspective on feeling very, not only very defensive of the self, but also the ability to defend other people. Like I love how Captain America's main weapon as such is a shield, because it's something that can both protect and protect yourself, protect others, but it can also you can throw it in someone's face. Like
Mm-hmm.
my offense is defending other people. Um, so the pangolin having these really hard scales, lions can't get through to it when they're curled up in this little ball. Um, and the fox is something that is very kind of very, I think, very elegant, very clever, very intelligent. There are all qualities that I would like to see in myself, and by having that kind of avatar, I feel that that's something I can keep working towards, something that is both very hard like a shield, but also very kind of clever and pretty, and it's kind of an ideal, you know, thing to kind of aim for with my in my self improvement, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Nice.
that's actually very interesting. Because I mean, hybrids are awesome. Uh, Personally, I know this because I am one, which is yay.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but I mean, like again, that's one of the more interesting hybrids that I've actually seen so far, aside from Chimera and all those things. But nobody really expects a pangolin, and I mean, I guess this one hits a bit closer to home because obviously there was that pangolin day on Google and with that
Yeah.
little love story of theirs, which was absolutely like it was the cutest damn thing I'd ever seen.
Oh, it's amazing.
It's for Valentine's Day, right?
I yeah, that one. It was awesome. I'm gushing. Okay, so with with respect to sort of like the fact that you've broken your book up into what was it? Tetra is five? No,
Four.
Four.
six, four. Okay. Uh, is so you already have a definitive beginning and end for this?
Yes.
Okay. And like how exactly when it comes to getting to that ending, do you think that you might even consider continuing with the story if it looks like there's something that could branch off from there?
The more I write, the more I feel like I could write. But I think if I did, they would be spin-offs, like side stories, because with the main story, I have a very definitive place as to where this arc will end. But I know that as I get into the third book, which is actually a prequel to the first two, it will be. I'm already starting to see areas where they could be potentially this whole other series set between 3 and 1, if that makes sense. But I don't know. I mean, I have a lot of other ideas in my head that I want to develop. This is the one that is most special to me, but I also want it to remain special. So I feel like if I have, this is kind of where I feel like the best quality of the story is in this section, this story arc here. And I know that I could write more, but at least right now, it's not in my mind enough to feel like I could do a good enough job with it. So I want to make sure that these 4 books and this little side story novella are the quality that they are in my head when I think of them, when I write them.
Okay. I mean, like, one of the reasons why I ask is because obviously, you could probably continue with the sort of world that you've created, a la Raymond D. Feist, with the large amount of different sort of story arcs that he has that all seem to set themselves in the same world. What are your inspirations for writing? Like, I mean, who got you to where you are, I guess?
Oh goodness. I guess first of all, I have to credit my mum, because I had a writing exercise in primary school and I wrote it down and I thought, oh, it's really good, it's really exciting. And she looked at it and she said, she wasn't doing my homework for me, but she said, you know what makes books good is to know how characters feel. And she went through it with me again and said, well, how does he feel when he did this and this and this? So helped me kind of develop my own writing style from the age of about 8 or 9. But I mean, even before that, actually, my older sister would write and illustrate little stories for me, like 2 or 3 pages, when I was sad or upset. So stories have always been something that I found great comfort in. In terms of my own reading, there is a series called The Deptford Mice by Robin Jarvis. I read that probably 5 or 6 times when I was younger, just because they're all mice characters. They were fantastic. They had a strong, like, heroine at from the outset. Lots of really strong female characters, and I had 2 sisters and a great mum. And so I always found that when women were written as being kind of rubbish or weak, I would find them a little disingenuous. So I took great inspiration from those. What else did I read? The Red Wall series, when I got into that after I broke my leg, that was, again, more animals and stuff like that. There was a Diane Wynne Jones novel called Dog's Body, about an astral body that had been exiled into the body of a German shepherd for murdering another celestial body, which is an incredible story. So lots of things like that, I guess, primed the way for me to really have animals in my head, and develop a very the style. If I went back and read them all now, I could probably pick out clues as to where I got my nuances in my writing.
Well, I mean, what was it? It's always said that no piece of writing is ever stands alone as its own piece of writing anymore, which is, I guess, maybe slightly sad if you think about it in that way, but also means that we do draw inspiration from other people to know that there are people out there who write very, very well, and that we, I guess, in our own ways, commend them by using little tidbits of, story arcing or, things that people go through and things like that. And it's very, very difficult to change something, so differently and not have a hit and miss with it.
Yeah, because I mean, especially when stories they resonate so well because of the way the message is given. When you change it, you ultimately affect what the message is. So, yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay. I mean, one could say that you're starting out, but I guess you're not really doing that. I mean, it's if 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 one thinks about sort of the idea of role play and things like that, I know that role play in and of itself actually helps writing, which is something that I've always found to be sort of very interesting to note. I know that like not necessarily that it affects poetry writing because that's more my field of I wouldn't say expertise, amateurese. Um, and but the thing is that like being able to constantly put yourself into a position where you have to change something to fit a different scene, to maybe play a different character a lot of the time, to be able to sort of feel your way into it. I mean, say with your what was it, the Scottish brogue, for instance. I mean, there's a specific, and it's the way that you changed it almost immediately when you went directly into the Scottish brogue. Is that correct?
Yeah.
You say you know a lot, I think. Whereas when you're not speaking like that, you don't necessarily put that out as often.
Yeah.
So it's like you're living yourself into a character like almost all the time. And I mean that's impressive, I guess. I guess it's impressive. um, because I don't think that like many people sort of realize just what kind of help that actually does. When somebody says, "Oh no, I'm going to RP now," obviously everybody thinks about being ooh dirty kind of thing, and it really isn't a lot like that. Sometimes we just do it because it's fun rather than anything else. It's not like I have to get my jimmies off, you know. If we're talking that kind of role play, for those of you know, there is a difference. Who those of you who are listening, between like certain types of role play and other kinds of role play, um, which is interesting. Flash plugin and Chrome are not friends, says Mind, which I agree with because for some reason they aren't. I don't know what's been happening recently, but it really sucks. I'm sorry, I was offhandedly reading a comment that somebody put in. Because it constantly says that on first stream we're offline, but we're not.
Oh.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we're
But
streaming.
it's because of the yeah, it's because of the plugin that they use. I mean, I found that on like certain either streaming or sites like Dailymotion, for instance. You open up a page, it says plugin not here, and then you have to click on it to accept the fact that the plugin opens up. It's the same thing with DeviantArt. If you want to look at a Flash program there, you literally have to click to accept to open it.
Are
And
you?
nowadays, it does this wonderful thing that if you want to, you know, watch it full screen on Chrome,
Hmm.
it downloads it.
Oh,
That's
weird.
strange.
I really don't necessarily want to download it because every single time you do download it, it says, "This may be a dangerous file. Please don't do this." And you're going to sit there going like, "But I really want to see this in better detail than like 640 by 480, you know?"
You guys have weird issues with your
But
browsers.
Chrome, man. You're probably a Firefox user
No,
also.
I use Chrome. I'm fine with it. Like, I haven't had any troubles like that.
I have nothing but trouble with Chrome.
That's
I'm going
weird.
to change to Opera Mini.
Everyone says
I'm
Opera's.
going to go back to Internet Explorer, guys.
Oh boy. That doesn't
What is
exist
that?
anymore, remember?
Oh, fair enough.
It's
Cool. That
Edge
means that I
now.
don't have to cry myself to sleep.
It's Microsoft Edge now.
Okay. Is it Edge now?
Yeah, Microsoft Edge.
Because Edge isn't another thing that I have to like always wonder about, considering that cell phones go to Edge and it pisses me off. So the connotation between the word Edge and
It
that Edge and
is
other edges
is slow
never
internet.
work. Yeah.
Where were we?
Whenever anyone says edge now, I immediately think of edge lords and like people being edgy online.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
typically what goes to
exactly.
mind for me.
Oh, ye Reaper
Once
mains.
again, welcome, welcome to, I guess, pretty much everything to do with Edge. Because it does make you salty. It makes, I swear to goodness, Edge just equals LOL players a lot
Mm-mm.
of the time,
I I
or
wouldn't
anything like.
I wouldn't know.
No,
I've
you
never
approve of this message.
I I wouldn't know. I've never dabbled in the sin known as League of Legends.
I have. I'm watching it right now. It's the weird thing. This is instead of playing Binding of Isaac, this is what I do now.
Just watch LOL
I have it
gameplay.
moving on my screen. Yeah.
Alright.
You should see when I'm doing it while I'm playing music. Every now and again, I stop the music and I go, "Oh, this team is doing well."
Dude, they're,
But any case, enough.
they want you to
Enough
they
about.
want you to do music,
Yeah.
not live stream freaking LOL games or like live commentate LOL games.
Would you rather I do Call of Duty?
I'd rather you stick to your job.
I do stick to my job. Music is played.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Among other things.
Putting it out there.
Okay,
Yes, music is played, and the Binding of Isaac is played by you.
okay. So where were we?
Yes. I mean, I'm actually very interested in this, like, live roleplay stuff. Like, I think that's where we got to,
Mm-hmm.
and so how does one even sort of get into a position where you're doing TV roles and historical reenactments with stage combat and in movies? How do you get involved with that specifically?
I was very lucky. Well, yes and no, I guess. My I did fencing in England. I had done it for years and years, and our coach, who was a former Olympic coach, sadly passed away. So we had a number of guest fencing instructors come in, and one week, one of them was this guy called Darren with his friend Paul, and they both worked with the local museum at Arundel Castle, and they did Norman, Viking, medieval sword reenactments, and they did a little display at my fencing club, and I was immediately taken in by all this because one of the reasons that I did fencing was because I thought sword fighting was amazing. But fencing was always one of those weird things because you had rules, you could only hit here and here and here, and this was this was proper sword fighting. You know, this is hit someone round the back of the head with it and they're dead kind of sword fighting.
Yeah.
You're not trying to kill each other now, but you know the
Yeah.
patterns and the fighting style was such. You know.
Yeah, fencing is fencing sort of frou-frou, but this is like I'm gonna go for the throat kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It was not only just the choreograph stuff, but also the sparring as well. That was very kind of visceral. Like this would actually hurt you if we were not deliberately not hurting each other with it. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Practice restraint for the safety of the other patrons, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. But they got me into their group, and they were based out of Arundel Castle, which is one of the castles around the city I used to live in England called Chichester. And they would do displays there every sort of holiday, stuff like that. We'd do all different time periods, and I worked my way up. I was promoted to a knight eventually.
Huzzah!
And eventually, yeah, I know. And eventually the group got big enough that we were asked to. They did filming for bits of the Tudors and various other bits and pieces there. So the castle was always very in on the kind of the filming circuit because it was one of the very few working castles that had a large amount of lots of different ages preserved, even though most of it was destroyed in the Civil War. So they'd filmed documentaries there, like Tony Robinson's Worst Jobs in History. There were some people in England in the US may know Laura Mackenzie, who was like a travel presenter person. She did some things there. We did some National Geographic documentaries, and through working with them and the local festival theatre, because I had some friends in the youth theatre and I choreographed fights for them. Best thing that I did there was with the youth director choreograph a 75-person fight at the end of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe.
Ooh!
It was insane and incredible. But yeah, and then through these people I got to meet. I was put on like a list of these various people for the useful contacts, I guess. I became a useful person who knew stage combat, and they would ask me to do this and this. I was in a production of Cyrano de Bergerac, directed by Trevor Nunn. and acted on stage with Joe Fiennes, which was amazing. He's a very nice guy.
Okay.
And was in the Young Victoria, which is the Martin Scorsese film about Queen Victoria in her youth.
Ooh.
Oh yeah, I remember. I think I remember that
So-
as a thing that happened.
So,
Yeah,
so you
it didn't get as sort of widespread attention as I felt like it should, because it's a very good movie, but it was a good experience, and they had nice food, so I can't complain.
So you've technically worked with Martin Scorsese.
I don't know if was he on set. That might have been the second unit director that we worked with. I didn't see him anyway. I think he was actually inside the castle. We were all outside being extras, waving at Emily Blunt as she was going by in the carriage.
But regardless, you worked on a Martin Scorsese movie.
I have, yes. I worked in a Martin Scorsese movie and
Damn,
worked with
son.
Trevor Nunn as well, who's one of the biggest names in Broadway theatre, which is really cool.
Wow,
That's
is
insane.
yeah. That's not to be snuffed at.
No,
No.
he was very nice as well.
That's always good. It's good to hear. Always good to hear directors who aren't assholes, or people that you admire
Yes.
that aren't assholes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and when it comes to like working in theater and working in those kinds of environments, because it's something that I guess not many furries do. How how did you feel sort of like in those kinds of areas? I know that some of the furs that we've possibly spoken to, not necessarily have we spoken to them. We haven't actively spoken to them, but we've heard of them. That there are people who work obviously at Disney. And things like that. So I mean, what I'm trying to get at is like what's the experience like there in comparison to, say, I guess the reading aspects, like the writers' crews and things like that you probably have to deal with, and publishers.
It's very interesting because writers, I mean, primarily you talk with writers online because it's it's a different means of communication. So you still get this very kind of creative, very engaging atmosphere, but in performing arts, it's very kind of, people are a lot more exuberant outside, and it can be it's kind of terrifying for a little bit because I'm very. I used to be, I still am, a very kind of introverted person. I have a certain amount of energy, and once it goes, that's it. I don't want to be there anymore. When you're acting on stage, you don't really have a choice but to be active. You have to perform. You have to belt out all the lines that you have. So you have to really kind of steel yourself in the moment a lot more than you do for, when you're interacting with writer people, where you generally have a bit more time to kind of prepare and I'll just edit my reply here and stuff like that. I mean, it's an amazing experience. Going out on stage was always really terrifying, pretty much up until the moment that you were on stage. That sense of anticipation is something that you rarely get anywhere else, even in the TV work and stuff like that, because you know that you have, hundreds, maybe 1,000 people outside waiting to see you, and they're not even necessarily going to be looking at you, but you know that you're there to be either to help other people be looked at by being a backdrop or a focus point, or you're the one that's going to be there giving them lines, presenting them story and stuff like that. It is really an incredible experience, and I actually managed to do some stage combat very specifically on stage in a number of productions. One of them was at Warwick Castle for the British Fencing Academy's 60th anniversary, and got to meet Bob Anderson.
Did you guys do a reenactment of like Hamlet's duel with what's his name?
Don't ask me. I've forgotten so many years
I can't
ago.
remember, I'm afraid. I haven't actually read Hamlet. But I mean, they did selections of famous fights throughout theatre and stuff like that. But we did a reenactment of a prize fight, so quarterstaffing and short sword and buckler.
Ooh.
It was a very famous duel where I can't remember the character specifically, but it was a very well documented duel, one of the very first, and had a great quarterstaff fight in it. I love quarterstaff. But I mean, it's
Would you have reenacted what was it? Robin Hood's staff fight with Little John?
I would love to do that. I would love to do that someday.
Doing
Like-
that on like a. Well, I mean, the thing is that
Yeah,
as far
like
as
which
the
one?
story
The
goes,
Robin
I
Hood Men in
wouldn't
Tights
bring this.
version.
Yeah, a Men in Tights version would be nice. Yeah. Well, your staff's twice as long as mine.
It's like wrapping each other on the knuckles.
Mhm.
It hurts, by the way. That it really hurts.
Tiny, tiny sticks. Have you ever considered doing what is it, kendo?
I did for a few weeks. I did kendo. Unfortunately, at the time I was working as a butcher at a grocery store here, and they completely changed up my hours, and I couldn't make it anymore.
Uh-huh.
Now I'm not working there anymore. I could actually go back, but the few lessons I did were so different to anything I'd ever done. It was incredible.
What is it? I know that I've got a friend who used to do fencing at one point, and he was speaking about this one girl that seemed to not like him very much. And apparently, you've got to call at times if you're going for a specific shot. And I remember that they were playing with they were dealing with dull sabers at the time.
Okay.
And I remember that she did this. I don't know what the technical term for it is, but she did a step forward jab.
Okay, like a
And
lunge.
So yeah, she lunged, and it just hit him square on in the wonderful area that you really shouldn't hit things there.
Oh.
Oh yeah.
And she walked off after that. I think he didn't come back to at least 2 practices beyond that because I think his pride was hurt at that point.
Just as
Yeah.
pride?
Has anything like that ever happened to you, like during sparring sessions? That's a weird question.
Yeah,
isn't it?
I've had some interesting injuries. The fencing particularly not so much, but there was one time I was refereeing and the participants got kind of wild, and that one of their swords flung out and wrapped me across the knuckles. And the foils are surprisingly flexible and they whip horribly, so that hurt. The most impressive injury that I got was when we were doing this very, very specifically choreographed fight with sharp swords that we hadn't blunted them yet because they were very cheap. And it's always that, okay, one last time, and I was supposed to get killed. I mean, thankfully I didn't, but it felt like I was going to be. And he passed the sword under my arm in that classic kind of stage death kind of thing, and somehow my right hand got caught on the end of the sharp sword.
Oof.
And it went, the tip of it went through my hand. Thankfully missed both tendons and the vein running across the back of my hand, so it bled very little and scarred very little. And actually the scar is less prominent now than a mole on my hand. And I'm really annoyed because it's a great story to tell people I got stabbed in the hand with a Georgian saber. But I show them the scar and they're like, that's it? And I'm like, yeah, but you know, it was a big sword. I did the injuries I gave to other people. Some of them were quite nasty. Just because the one I remember most, the one that made me feel like I was going to throw up most, was this. We had a multi-man melee in one of our tournaments at Arundel Castle. He's a very nice guy. He's still around, which is good. We try to not lean in with our heads to when we fight, because obviously the head is the one that you don't really want to get hit on. Unfortunately, the tip of my sword came a little bit high as he was leaning in, and it hit him square in the nose, broke it in 2 places, and kind of clipped a bit of his right nostril off. There was a lot of blood there, and I didn't want to fight anymore that day after that because it was just ugh.
Yeah.
It's a very good sport about it. I was very, very apologetic.
I would be too, like apologizing to the nth dimension for actually stabbing someone in the face, like legitimately. Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I'm sorry.
But congrats on not killing a man, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, like an inch closer, and it would have been in his cheekbone and coming across like his jawline there. So, I mean, the nose was. The joke that other people made was that he wasn't a very pretty bugger to begin with, but even so, it was like, I still don't really want to do deconstructive surgery on anyone,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
live in front of people, you know. So
Yeah. Let's not turn into.
It's all right, you know.
Let's not turn into that Mike Tyson fight.
no.
People look. It's weird the bloodlust of people at present sometimes, that we feel that it's something that we wouldn't mind, you know. It's like, oh
Yeah.
no, cool. I've just stabbed this man live in front of a whole bunch of people. He's bleeding profusely. A lot of people have probably started laughing at this point because Schadenfreude, but it's it's that kind of like experience, isn't it?
Yeah, and it does generate that kind of morbid curiosity, like
Mm,
rubbernecking at traffic accidents and stuff like
Mm.
that. Like, you know, if you see something, you go, ooh, ooh, that's horrible, but you look anyway because you almost anticipate that kind of response.
Yeah.
yeah, it's really like trying to find out whether somebody's being covered under one of those warm blankets or not.
Yeah.
You know, those silver ones. And you'd be
Oh
sitting there
yeah.
going like, wow, what's happened here? But it's literally more along the lines of like, wow, I'm glad that's not me. And yet we almost throw up when dogs get run over.
Yeah.
But that's just sad.
It is.
Mm.
I generally like gag when I drive past it. It's
Mm.
one of the like it's really scary for me because that's kind of like for some reason that reminds me more about my own mortality than a traffic accident does, and I don't know why.
Hmm.
I feel like dogs deserve it far less than people do.
Mm.
Yeah.
We don't deserve dogs.
No.
Mm.
So, morbid curiosity aside, like you seem to be so well, I guess, what's the word educated that I'm looking for? Well versed in like a whole bunch of different things. Um, I mean, obviously, right now you've had to give up on a couple of things because of your move to North Carolina,
Mhm.
and I guess maybe for some furs out there, you know, who are considering moving for, I guess, relationship reasons or cost of living or anything along the lines of that. What was the biggest adjustment that you had to make?
Um, there's not really any curry over here.
That's such a British thing to say.
um, no, I mean, I've always had. The more I was in England, the more I kind of developed. Uh, it was weird because the later years that I was over there were when I was starting to really develop my sense of self. Um, and leaving that at a point where I felt I was becoming, at least I think I thought I was becoming more like me was very different. But, you know, it was very. I also, it never was like a Hobson's choice. I knew that this was where we wanted to be, where we had to be, you know, for our relationship, for us to do the things that we felt were most important to us
Hmm.
to fulfill life-wise, you know.
Yeah.
So I mean, it wasn't an instant decision to come to. It was something that was, you know, labeled over for quite a long time. And I think any time that you're thinking about something for that long usually means that it's at least worth a try.
Mm.
Um,
Hmm.
and you know, the our relationship was something that I knew that if I did not have that in my future, that would be the worst kind of future. Any other future without my wife was not one that I wanted to have. So
Hmm.
that became kind of the driving force. But you know, because I could take anything. I could still potentially do acting, writing anywhere, but I couldn't be with my wife anywhere other than where she was. So that was like, even though, you know, there was some adjustment for getting a new job, making sure that I was working long enough that we could afford a house and stuff like that. Um, I couldn't sacrifice any of that. Um, I couldn't sacrifice her for stuff that I'd already kind of built up. So I don't feel like I've lost any of that. The thing is, when you move, because it's not in proximity, it's very easy to feel like you don't have it anymore. I mean, sometimes that is the case, but you know, you are still a sum of everything that you have had and everything that you've been and everything that you've done. And once I think once I was able to kind of understand that actually I'm still who I was, that I've not lost anything in myself for having moved, it became a lot easier to kind of adapt and open up and stuff like that. And it helped that I made some really good friends pretty early on when I got here, that helped kind of cement that sense of self, I guess.
Oh, that's really
Okay.
cool.
No? Yeah.
No. I just said that's a really cool way of looking at it. Like, sort of, yeah. I don't really know what to say. It's just a very good outlook on life, very positive.
Yeah. And when it comes to sort of that perspective that you're given, I guess, when it comes to the idea of, I guess, relationships and love, and obviously a lot of the time, especially with people that you really want to spend the rest of your life with, irrespective of what happens while that's happening, how do you feel the reaction, I guess, or what kind of problems do you perceive when that actually, comes across as an issue, like, having to move to, I guess, from Britain to North Carolina? Because I know that there are a lot of furries out there who actually, feel that that's one of the things that they need to do, because, I mean, online relationships, I'm assuming, I'm not sure how you met, we didn't, so I guess preface it with that, and then, like, how exactly did it come to be that you would have to do that kind of move?
Oh yeah, we did meet online. It was a wonderful website called fictionpost.com. Funnily enough, I signed up for that website after my best friend, who I'd been living with for 2 years, went. He moved to Australia with his parents for a year, and I was kind of lonely, so I met a friend of mine at the theatre who was already a member of this website, and she said, "Oh, you should join up, and we can, if you're a writer, we can read your stories and stuff like that." I met my wife through there. We met online and talked a lot, and I eventually came over to visit her in America, and then came over again and again and again. I think I'm trying to get my thoughts in order. I think I've lost where I was going. Obviously, the decision to move such a long way is not something to take lightly. You have to be really sure that you're communicating with each other honestly about what you really want from where you are. And that was one of the hurdles that we actually didn't talk about. We kind of just assumed that we would be okay in England for a little while, because we lived in England for 2 years, I think it was, and but we never really actually talked about it. We just assumed that's what we would do, and we ended up not actually feeling as fulfilled as we wanted to. And until we realized that, we're like, oh well, actually, why didn't we talk about this? Once we actually communicated where we both wanted to be, essentially first, were we still interested in each other? Yes. And what did we want from life? Well, we want to do this and this and this and this. Well, where's best to do that? How can we help build each other up and ourselves up so we can do that? Where is the best place for it? I guess that kind of assessment of what the pros and cons of each place you could move are going to be. It's very much worth investigating, because being together is the ultimate goal, but it can resentment of either lack of communication or lack of planning, rushing into things, all those kind of things can really sour a relationship, even if you never say anything about it. The slow death is the worst one, I think. There's a quote that I read somewhere. So it's always best to be open and honest about what you want, and actually, if you don't want to be a particular place, is there a compromise that you can make? We almost moved to New Zealand, but that was going to be too big, too difficult, and if for us both to be in an unfamiliar place, it can either work out amazingly or it can work out horribly, because neither of you have that kind of familiarity with a place to find comfort and ground yourself.
Yeah. That's usually the difficult part. Even for someone who is already moving to their non-native place, like for you moving to the US for so long, or for if I don't know how that must be, but I can imagine that the transition was made a lot easier by having someone who knows the landscape.
Absolutely, yes, definitely.
So yeah, both being in a weird place must be like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, because if neither of you are really grounded, it makes it very hard to find that kind of emotional base to, because you have to support each other, and if you don't have your own support, it's like you're both trying to stand on water, I guess.
Yeah.
And you're both sinking at different rates.
Can only keep each other afloat for so long.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. That's actually pretty interesting. And I don't know. Like, I mean, you obviously say that you went there and back and there and back in the and everything like that. And I guess for I'm going to preface by saying that it seems like it was a bit easier for you guys to sort of make that kind of decision. And I mean, I'm not sure. Like, I'm not. Again, I'm prefacing just by saying that on a monetary level, it might have been a bit more, I guess, simple to do that. First world countries and everything like that. I mean, like, I know that I dabbled with the idea of a couple of years back. Scratch can attest to this. That I would move to America after finding some, I don't know, rich boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever I would be able to find, and just go there and marry and make sure that my life will be perfect without having to be in South Africa ever again. And there was a point that I started realizing, hey, but wait, America doesn't need people like me. It's a weird sort of thing that I have. But I mean, like, it must still weigh on a person that, say if you're not in a monetary position to be able to actually do something like that, irrespective of how much you love somebody. Because I know that there's a wonderful story on StoryCorps. It's a YouTube channel that I would suggest that anybody should listen to. It mostly talks about war veterans and things like that, because it was based on the idea of the fact that they would have a story for every person that died in September 11's attacks.
Oof.
And I mean, yeah, no, believe me, it's a very, very poignant thing. I know that I've spent hours torturing myself just sitting there and listening to the stories that we're talking about. But one of the stories that they spoke about was there was a guy in America, and there was a woman in, I think it was Thailand or something like that. And somebody sent an email because his name and her name were almost exactly the same, and their emails were almost exactly the same. So he forwarded this through to her, and eventually they started chatting, and eventually she flew over. And for 8 days, she stayed there, and on the 8th day, he proposed to her.
Wow.
Because they'd been talking for like 2 or 3 years, and she sort of said, I knew it was coming, and it was kind of scary at the time, but, she said yes, and, they got married, and most people think that they're crazy for doing that. And, which means that, online relationships can work if you work at it.
Yeah.
And I know that's maybe I'm not necessarily sure whether this influences in any way, because I know that like personal, stories sometimes and somehow find their way into books that we're writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, it's an incredible journey. And how does one cope, I guess, with having to make such a big decision? Like, I mean, there must have been a point that you kind of sat there going like, what exactly am I doing? And how did you get over that?
There were times when it was very difficult, especially when I think in the run up to the move, the good times in England were almost harder to deal with than bad times, because you can always write anything off that you don't like as like, well, I'm not going to experience that again, so that's okay. I'm fine with not having to sit in traffic at this stupid roundabout anymore, or having to deal with natty NHS customers or something like that. The times with like your friends that you would go out with every week, 2 weeks or something like that, and go, it's going to be like maybe months or years before I see these guys again, are very, they do take a toll on you. And especially if you think that when you're going over to a place like that, I don't have any work history, I don't even know how well my education correlates, because the school systems are completely different, like the grading system is different. It is very intimidating. But I think that when you get to a point that necessity is driving you so far, you find ways of just it's not getting ahead, keeping your head down and getting into it, but actually kind of raising your head up and going, okay, I need to focus on how I can hit the ground running, or having a plan makes a really big difference. To help with my various sort of social anxieties and stuff like that, I try and make lists every day of stuff that I have to do. I think if you're making a big list like that, if you're making a big jump like that, writing down like goalposts of what you have to achieve, even just like little easy jobs, and then like the bigger things like I need to start applying for jobs now, or I need to build up this much money in this year, I need to be putting aside this much money, and the money is probably the biggest thing, because you got to make sure you have something when you get over there, how do you transfer it and all that sort of stuff. The more you plan, the better it is. When my wife was coming over here, we didn't really plan very much. We were just like, okay, I've got a bed in the spare bedroom, that's cool. But it wasn't. When we were coming back over, we knew where we were going to stay. We had already applied for jobs. We knew that we wanted to be out of my in-laws' place within a certain amount of time. I had a rough idea of where we wanted to try and be moving to. So at least having those kind of goals and focuses in mind, even after the event, helped the progression of, coming to terms with the move you're going to make. And I think even just breaking it down into tasks that you can focus on help stop it from being this one big thing and make it lots of little things that you can conquer step by step. And that makes the big event itself kind of a smaller thing, like I'm going to take the flight now, is terrifying. But it's less terrifying given all that you've already achieved before you get there.
Yeah. I get the feeling that, okay, you are up for, so I'm going to change like completely topic for like a couple of seconds. You're obviously up for an Ursa Major. Did you, I think, was your book also nominated in the, what was the other one, Scratch?
The other award, Coyote.
Yeah, the other award. Eh?
The Coyote Award.
Yes, the Coyote Award. Were you also nominated for a Coyote?
I wasn't, sadly, but the Coyote is the official Furry Writers Guild Choice Awards. I think the Ursa Major is like a popular whole entire fandom award.
Okay. And how does that sort of feel? Like, I mean, I know that we've spoken about the Ursa Majors. We've spoken to the founder of the Ursa Majors. But I mean, like, what does it feel to actually get an award, or not an award, but a nomination? What sort of like comes with that? Is it that you do your own sort of what do you call it?
Promotion.
Advertising and promotion for it, and get people to go, oh, Jana, put me on for the Ursa Major Awards. Was it more of a surprise that it sort of got there?
Kind of both. I mean, I put myself out there and say, hey, my book is eligible for a nomination. If you really liked it, please, give it a nomination, because, obviously publicity and spreading the word really helps writers. A really big deal. Writing is one of those really weird things, especially in a fandom which is very, very much based around a visual aesthetic. Writing is really hard to promote, because, and I mean, even with the books themselves, most of them, you're still going to be judging them by their cover, because it's furry. How do you know if it's furry if you just have a title? So being able to have a book that people feel strongly enough to nominate feels like a really, really big deal to me. That really, really means a lot to me. So I'm very pleased to, even if I don't win the award, I'll be very happy having the nomination to sit there and go, yeah, I am at least this good, and for the next book I want to be even better and push myself even further to actually get the award. I mean, even if I don't get it this time, even if I do get it this time, that's still something I want to work towards. But yeah, you have to do a lot of your own, like, I'm awful at self-marketing, because I don't often believe that I'm worth the trouble. But I also at the same time want to know that I am, if that makes sense, because I want not me personally, I guess, but the book. I don't really care if I'm famous or not, but I would love for my books to be successful and for people to be enjoying them. And that's what I really want, is to share my book, not myself as such, but when you're a writer in a very kind of niche independent fandom, you do have to kind of put yourself out there as the book, because if you're the only one doing your own marketing, you have to be your own voice. You have to be your own kind of advocate, and that's hard if you are not used to kind of boasting about what you've achieved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, similar problems, I guess, there is that, not necessarily, but, similar-esque as that entire idea that, we run a podcast, and we're on a relatively well-known radio station in Germany, for instance, but I find it so odd to sit down and go, hey, we have all these awesome people, come listen, kind of thing. It's even if it's just that, you kind of sit there going like, do I really want to do that? Do I really need to do this? I don't know if I
do I want to be that guy, that insistent guy?
Yeah, and look, I mean, we tried doing it at one point, and mixed reviews mostly.
Yeah.
We have a far greater international audience at times than we do people from our own place, which oddly enough, I'm seeing that Advolf is on here again, one of the writers here from South Africa.
What up, Yaku?
Which is awesome. Yep, Yaku is here. So happy days. But I mean, like, the thing is that I mean, like, it's weird. Our international people, I mentioned this earlier. We've got Switzerland, we've got Germany, we have America, we've got Britain, for instance, and that always sort of gives me hope in ways. Sort of sitting there going like, yeah, well, we're kind of good at what we do.
Yeah, there are actually people who are willing to sacrifice their Sundays to listen to us ramble.
Yeah, an hour and a half of mostly bitching
of what this is, yeah.
80%. But yeah, so I mean, it's I guess, and it does feel kind of weird, like going onto Twitter and saying, hey, by the way, blah 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 blah. And I remember when I started, when like Scratch and I started this, there was a point that I would sit there and think like, is it necessary? Like I would weigh up the necessity of actively advertising or not. And eventually I kind of came up with this idea in my head saying, the people who want to listen will listen. And the people who don't want to listen won't listen. That's pretty much the only thing that I actively came up with in respect to that. And I don't know, it's weird, isn't it?
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, well, I think sort of part of the reason why we need to continue with it is sort of as you build up a, dare I say, a follower base, people who actually follow you on Twitter or check your posts on Facebook or check our posts on Facebook or whatever. At least to sort of rotate those in, and if they like or retweet that, then their followers can see it. Because I mean, the hashtag humble brag, but we do have quite a few sort of high-profile people who we follow and who follow us, and quite often they plug our name here and there. So we're thankful for that. We're thankful for getting the exposure through them.
Yeah. It's I mean it's weird, isn't it? Like it's that entire idea of feeling about fame but not necessarily wanting it but not.
Yeah. Like again, wanting the message to get out there but not wanting to be famous.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, like, if I'm looking at the art for your book, for instance, and it's so well done. Like, who did you actually get to sort of draw that?
Was it the first one or the second one?
The one on your Twitter page. I'm assuming it's from your book.
Oh yes, that one is the cover for Legacy. That was by Minna Sundberg, who is a Finnish artist who now has her own comic, Stand Strong, Stay Silent, I think. I feel really lucky to have been able to commission her before she started doing her own comic book, and she did a absolutely beautiful job capturing the characters and everything like that. I felt that the book cover was the one thing that I couldn't really cheap out on, because it was the thing that would instantly connect me to the fandom and the aesthetic of the book, and to show that look, this is not just a fantasy book that distinguishes people by their height or amount of facial hair. You know, this is like very distinct. I always wanted it to be unique, and I felt that I couldn't do that if I didn't have a really strong cover. Subsequent covers have been done by Katie Hofgaard, who's on Fur Affinity as Wolf Nymph.
Okay. Huh. When it comes to the...
No,
sorry, go.
No, go ahead. You're on a train of thought. I have a different question I want to ask.
Okay. When it comes to the designing of your armor, did you have any sort of say in the way that it was going to be done? Your clothing and everything like that. I know that, like, I mean, the first one doesn't necessarily show the armor off as much, but definitely I mean, you're looking at the pangolin in the front one with the, what is that, a serval?
It's an ocelot.
Ocelot, okay. Like, when it came to that sort of working of the armor, like, you must have had some sort of, like, play in that. Why exactly did you choose to keep the arms open, for instance? Is that from personal experience that having full body armor doesn't necessarily work as well? Or was there any kind of idea or ideology that you had behind that you felt needed to come out as an aesthetic?
Visually, in terms of armor, it's less of a. I guess I do pick the influences I have by the experiences I've had. I very much like the Fire Emblem armor and a lot of the clamp designs for their the kind of the flowing nature of them. So the concept art was actually drawn partly by my sister and partly by one of her friends as a Christmas present, as a commission for me when I was, even before I released it, I self-published the books. So the designs, I'd written them down in a Word document. It was like, I want it to look like this guy from this thing and this element, but without this kind of thing. So I wrote down very lengthy descriptions of what I wanted each of them to look like. And usually they're based off particular characters that I've been inspired by, or a look that I found online. Sometimes it is practicality. Like, I remember having a particular piece of armor that I really, really liked, and I wanted characters to... There were a set of shoulder armor. They were beautiful. They had like wings on the back. So there are things that are very special to me that I have experienced that I want them to have as well. So I guess it's a mix of both, and being able to work with incredibly talented artists. Katie Hofgaard is huge into like doing, you know, fantastic armor designs and you know, flying creatures and stuff like that. She's been amazing to work with. Both of them were really, really open to my rambling about how I wanted my little character babies to look. So I'm very grateful for that.
Okay. Huh. Wow, okay. Scratch, you had a...
Yeah. Just a sort of, I don't know, how can I say this? Correct my bias, please. I see on your Twitter profile you say you're an author of a YA, I'm assuming young adult fantasy novel series, correct?
Yes.
Is it just me, or does young adult kind of come with a bit of a stigma?
I don't know. I mean, it's possible that it does. I know that there's a lot of paranormal romance in young adult, but I guess basically I wanted to distinguish it that it was meant for a general audience, but wasn't patronizing, I guess.
Okay.
I guess that's where a lot of the books that I really enjoyed were kind of young adult stuff, but not... I never really liked urban fantasy, I guess, because it's very difficult to do, but I liked... The Dark Portal and stuff were things that I read when I was young, but I knew that they were very dark, so I considered that those were for younger adults or older kids. And it's a really weird bracket because you are getting into that, well, it's more violent than a book for kids, but it's not explicit.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I felt like that distinction was probably the best way for categorizing it. So that was the decision behind that.
All right. Yeah, I guess in my head it's difficult to separate young adult from, as you mentioned, paranormal romance.
Yeah, no,
Because of all
I'm
the
not really into
schlock
that.
that's come out recently. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Good for clearing that up for me. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Because I know that Redwall was mostly sort of young adult-esque, if I'm not mistaken. I know that a lot of the things in a lot of the movies that we enjoy these days were meant for a more young adult um, audience. I mean, like Lemony Snicket, for instance, was, I guess, could have been considered young adult. And maybe, I guess, maybe the difference is where we sort of draw that line on a book level. Like if you go into a library, you go to the young adult section, you find like a whole bunch of like a myriad of possibly like really awesome novels, but that you wouldn't find in say the fantasy or the fiction section for whatever reason, irrespective of whether they could easily have been placed there. Because I mean, like I found a lot of my books just I mean, when I used to like walk to the library or go to the library very often, I would go into the young adult section because the books there seemed to be almost better than the ones in the fantasy section at times. I mean, I wouldn't have found The Wolves of Time if it hadn't been one book from the Wolves of Time series had been, I think if I'm not mistaken, misplaced into the young adult section. Eventually got taken over the fantasy section because the second book was imagery-wise was quite what's the
Graphic.
word that I'm looking for? Graphic, yes, exactly. It involved like seas of dead bodies, not necessarily seas, but like a place where dead bodies were being dumped.
Windmills full of corpses.
Yeah, kind of really creepy things where a person who just died apparently like rigor mortis had decided to stop setting in and apparently released the air within his body through various orifices. That kind of like imagery that you're always going to remember. And I read this book when I was 13. I remember that scene particularly and telling my dad, "Hey dad, these people swear." And he's like, "I'm going to take this book from you and you're not going to read it again." Lo and behold, the next week I went back and I took the book out without him knowing. and finished it because it was actually a very good story. It's that, at 13 years old, you really need to hear about sex in that kind of context.
Who doesn't?
But yeah, so, I mean, again, young adult doesn't necessarily just mean, teens. And yeah, it's a weird misnomer. I think it's a British thing. I'm going to put it out like that. Because I know that we still have a young adult section, but I'm not necessarily sure that our young adult section is the same as the young adult section in America. I'm wondering if you possibly know.
Yeah, I mean there are definitely there's young adult and there's like teen, and teen is what I generally consider to be the kind of the more for want of a better term, I consider teen books to be more kind of vapid and a little bit superficial, but young adult is like you are a young adult. Like maybe you don't want to experience all the graphic stuff, but you want something a little bit hardcore than like, you know, like a typical Saturday morning cartoon with a moral or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of pressure on young adults, you know, and teenagers as well, just to be dark. And sometimes these stories are dark for the sake of being dark, not because it serves the story. But I think that there should always be a presentation of, yeah, the world is a scary place, but you can get through it. So that's why I like kind of directing these books at a younger audience, because you think, okay, you have all these hardships and battles and things and really nasty people that you're probably going to face. But look, if you're a good person and you have strength, then you will find a way to get through this. And I think for anyone that is about to go through a very scary transition like puberty, you know, that's something that I feel that's a message I kind of want to give to people.
Okay. That's actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
And it's actually kind of weird. I mean, you mentioned Redwall earlier, and I used to read Redwall while walking around in school halls. Like I would be so sort of connected to this. Like between classes, I would just take out the book, and I actively developed an art in being able to walk through a heavily trafficked hallway while still reading, full paragraphs of the book by then sort of quietly sort of shifting my eyes back up and being able to find the line that I was on. Weirdly enough, that's not a thing that carries through to reading something on a computer screen.
Or
Yeah,
or
and lo and
wandering on a
behold-
phone and texting.
Yeah. So where was I? It's completely different. But what I would like to ask is that now when it comes to it's Brian Jacques, right?
Uh,
Wasn't it?
I would. That's how I would pronounce it, but I've heard it pronounced Brian Jakes. But that may be an American thing.
Sorry. I have the same reaction to that because it's spelled Jacquees.
French.
Yeah,
Jacques.
like Jacques. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
For Jacques, yeah. But in that day and age, in the early to late 90s, when his books were something of a phenomenon before, uh, Tales from Hogwarts sort of came about. It's weird that, for instance, he never actually got that stigma of being a furry because he was writing in an intensely furry world.
Mm.
So how do you deal with something like that? Because I want to go into this idea of, obviously you sometimes read reviews, and that's the other thing that I was doing is I remember you posted something on Twitter about somebody who'd written a review that didn't necessarily take your book very well, for instance. And I guess maybe it has a lot to do with the idea that maybe they don't understand the genre, maybe they don't understand your writing, but like, how does one actually begin to, deal with criticism like that, especially when it comes to like a work of writing that you'd spent, I'd assume, years on, and will spend more years on to either perfect or to continue a specific kind of lineage. Like, how does it affect you personally?
It's when I got the first negative reviews, I was like, oh, how dare they, and you'd start to build up this kind of rage of you don't, and I went on this long diatribe on my blog about how this reviewer didn't know what they were talking about. And I mean, there are a couple of things with that. First of all, they had picked up the free copy that I had made in 2010, and that was the one that was pre-edited, hadn't gone through my editor and my publisher twice to really clean it up and stuff like that. So, I admit that there were problems with that draft, and that was part of the frustration with that particular review, was that actually it was an outdated copy and it took them 5 years to read it. I mean, I have books that I've bought that long ago that I've still not read, so fair enough. But, I was like, but I've done better since then, and I know I've improved, and I just wanted to, go on a rant about how actually, I mean, and I looked at, when something bad happens to you, you start, or at least with me, I start trying to research everything around the event and what could have changed here. You start information gathering. I guess that's probably an instinctive thing, because when you get hurt in the wild or something like that, you want to know what did it, how can I avoid it, could I have, is there something nearby that I can do to change the outcome of what's happening right now. So I went on this spree of looking up the other reviews, and there are a lot of very negative, not quite troll reviews, but they were very unnecessarily negative. I think there's a lot of people say I'm being honest in inverted commas, when what they actually mean is I'm going to be rude about it. And I think you can be honest in saying that you don't like something in a more constructive way, or at least in a polite way. If someone says, well, I'm just being honest, either they are being honest, or more likely, if someone has to tell you that they're being honest, then they're not really going to be very nice to you. And I think it's a problem with a lot of people have on the internet, is that they perceive brutality to be honesty, and that's not the case. So once I calmed down a bit and I thought, all right, I've had what I feel like is probably going to be the worst review that I've had. I can now accept that not everyone is going to like my book, and that's fine, as long as I have more people that like my book that don't like my book, and that seems to be the trend, which is I'm really, really thankful for. I was like, all right, I can't please everyone, and if I try to do that, I will destroy myself.
Yep.
I need to be doing what rewards me, what I, and if it's accepted, that's great. If it's not, then, I'll need to look at, especially if I want to become a professional writer, I'll have to start looking at changing my tack. And actually, if nobody is liking my stuff, what do I do to change that? And that's when you have to start analyzing actually what's in the context of the review. And a lot of this was just kind of, I felt like the person wasn't really paying attention and stuff like that. I can't change someone who doesn't really want to read my book in the first place. If they didn't really want to read it, that's on them. I can't sit there and make them read it. And it's not really worth my time if they're reading it just for the sake of it. I want them to read it because they're actually genuinely engaged in it. And I think that anyone who actually wants to read it will hopefully be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. Because, I remember actually I read through his entire review because you seemed rather, I guess at that point, slightly incensed by it when you were writing your response. And the thing is that your response came across as far more informative than his response to your book did. And that's actually something that's relatively noteworthy because, I guess a lot of the time, and I guess maybe this could probably be a little bit of a pointer to people who are younger, who are attempting to get into that sort of field. I know we kind of touched on this with Sean last week, is that entire idea that, take everything with a pinch of salt. Somebody is publishing your book. If you were self-published, for instance, then maybe it is a different story. But, as soon as somebody else has taken some form of interest in it, that means that there's a niche for it. There's somebody who's out there who's actively interested in what you have to do and what you have to, write about.
Yeah.
And when somebody else reviews it, it's not like it's the end of the world, I guess.
It's not like anyone's gonna publish you out of pity. Your work. Your work's. Yeah, if your work's good enough to be published, then it's something for you to be proud of. It's something for you to at least sort of stand back and say, yeah, okay, this isn't too shit. Like if you want to be that pedantic about it or negative about it,
and it's probably that idea of it's my first attempt. If this doesn't work, it's never going to work, kind of thing. And being able to sort of step past it and go, let's see what's constructive here. If there's nothing constructive there, then leave it.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to. But I guess, and it's one of the reasons why I said your response to that in your blog was a lot more informative about it and about the writing and things like that itself. You spoke to what you knew, you spoke to those kind of issues, but you never necessarily called them out, if you understand what I mean. And I think that's one of the problems with the internet these days. We feel as though we've got this free reign to call out anybody who may even be criticizing in a very sort of good way, in a way that says, look, this and this and this, these are all problems.
Yeah.
And it would do better if you attempted to fix them within your book. Otherwise, look, it's because of these issues that you have that it's terrible. But if you know how to write and if you know how to fix something, then you can look into it.
Yeah, if someone had legitimately come across a huge plot hole and I was like, oh my goodness, I didn't notice that before, I would be very embarrassed, but I can't fault them for actually paying attention to the book and going, hang on, why didn't they just do this? And I think, oh yeah, that's a legitimate response. That's on me. If I made a mistake and there's a character alive that shouldn't have been or something like that, and for some reason neither me or my editor noticed it, then I will completely hold my hands up and go, yeah, that was silly. I don't believe that. Well, I know that I'm not flawless. I'm not perfect, and my writing may well never be perfect. But I think that having accountability and keeping others accountable is also very important as well. Like you're saying, you don't have to. A criticism isn't necessarily an attack, and I think that people shouldn't always treat them that way.
Yeah.
No.
Well, that's very, very good information. I think that if for the people who are listening to this, I think that for those of you who are possibly going to dabble in writing or anything like that, take that into account.
Yeah.
It's important that we are able to have I guess, that kind of maturity.
Well, any creative pursuit, I suppose.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
exactly that. Writing, art, etc., etc.
Separate the tone from the message. Like
Yeah.
that helps a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, if one arm is genuinely longer than the other one, and you say that it's a perspective issue, and it really isn't, you know, then it's not the person who's commenting on it that's at fault at times.
Yeah.
Especially if they do it in a constructive way.
Yeah, I mean, if you burst into the stream or whatever and says, "Oh, your art looks rubbish. Look at this," and start like making memes out of it, that's very different to saying, "Hey, I noticed one of your arms kind of looks a little longer than the other. Am I seeing that right?" You know, you're presenting it very, very differently. So yeah, the tone message is a very good distinction to make too.
Okay. That's I mean, and we are sort of coming to the end of the interview. So we'd like to give you this opportunity to, if you want to have any shout outs or want to say anything to the people who may be listening or to anybody who might be listening to this when it comes onto YouTube eventually. What exactly, maybe your final words and, plug whatever you need to plug.
Oh goodness, I guess. Well, thank you two very much for having me on. It's been wonderful, wonderful discussion. Thank you to those who have checked out my book so far and people who've nominated me for Ursa Major Awards. If you do want to check out my books, there's a Facebook page. You search for The Resonance Tetralogy. It should come up. They're available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in paperback and ebook. My publisher has been a dream to work with. They've been very patient of me. They are Inspired Quill. They have a website, inspired-quill.com. And thank you to all the fantastic members of the Furry Writers Guild who've really given me a home on social media, connected me with hundreds of amazing people that I wouldn't have ever had a chance to talk to before. I believe this community has something in it that many online communities don't have, and I think that it has potential to be one of the best places for anyone to be, and strive for improving yourself, improving others in the best possible way, and I don't think anyone can ever criticize you for that.
Awesome.
Sweet,
right.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, go Scratch.
No. I was just gonna say thanks as well. So yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Finish up.
But yeah, so thank you for both of us. What the hell? Thank you from both of us for being on the podcast with us this evening. We really, really appreciated the conversation that we had. I think it was a very, very open and, I guess, honest conversation about a whole bunch of things that have been spoken about. I truly, personally enjoyed it. We're always happy to have you on again if you ever have, say, new things that are coming out, say either your new book or anything. I'm not sure, is your new book in the tetralogy going to be out this year, next year, whenabouts?
I am writing them right now. I'm writing both the ebook and the third book called Ruins Dawn. The ebook is more likely to be out sooner than the third book, but I will definitely keep you updated on that because it won't be for a little bit.
Okay, all right. Well, again, glad to have you on. Much appreciated, and we wish you all the best going forward.
Thank you so much, and you too as well.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah, and well, good luck with North Carolina.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Cool.
Yes, sorry. I'd like to thank the people who are listening as well, that being Abalon, Martin Z. Fox, Terrador, Wolf of Steelpaw. He seems to have left, not Wolfel, but the Yaku seems to have left, but we'll thank him again. And guest 230, guest 298, guest 322, and everybody else who's actively listening to this without actively being in the chat, we miss you. Sincerely, bottom of our hearts kind of thing. But yeah, so also on the first stream side, Mind, who was one of our longtime listeners on the first stream side as well. Thank you for constantly helping out with the first stream side and being there and commenting and everything like that. He actually did mention that in I think when we spoke about young adults, that it is actually a very dangerous time for young adults, in that it's the things that they see and read are most likely to be learnt on and perhaps mimicked in some actions in their lives. And that's absolutely true. I know that I've been influenced by characters that I felt very strongly connected to, because you dearly want to be them. Because they're just so much cooler than you are. But yeah, thank you again. We really, really do appreciate your inputs. Very, very happy to have you on. Please don't change your accent.
No, I won't. I might learn a few more, but I won't. This one will stay mine.
Okay. I'm glad.
Yeah, and yeah, good luck with,
All right.
with the VO work and everything that's going your way.
Hey, thank you so much.
Cool.
Right. Cheers, guys.
Yeah, we'll see you guys again next week. Cheers.
Bye.